really, really pleased to welcome two fantastic experts in this field who are going to be presenting and talking about Ibobbly. We have Chris Rule, who's a manager of eHealth implementation, and Tiarnee Schafer, who is a Ibobbly project officer and social and emotional wellbeing community liaison. They're going to be talking today about Ibobbly, which is a success story in translating our research to the real world and improving the social and emotional wellbeing of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. As you would know, mental health for this particular, did I mention how hard it is to present online for 3 hours? Presenting to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health can be a very, very tricky and salient point to do in the mental health journey. And these two fantastic experts are going to be talking to us today. Tiarnee is a fantastic, proud, and I hope I spelled this, pronounced this correctly. Sorry, Tiarnee is a proud Kaddoon woman from Mount Isa, Queensland. She's got a real passion for improving the mental health and wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. She's responsible for the day-to-day management of the Ibobbly app, one of my favourite apps at Black Dog, including the implementation of its ongoing quality assurance and engagement strategy. She's completing her master's in suicidology and is about to finish her honours in psychology. There are so many really smart people at Black Dog. Chris is responsible for Black Dog Institute's e-health implementation team, and it's focused on the management and ongoing safety and quality assurance of Black Dog Institute's publicly available digital services and their implementation. Chris and Tiarnee, away you go.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Taz. As you just mentioned today, we have the great pleasure of sharing with you a positive story about a Black Dog Institute project that's made its way from research to being a real world tool for building stronger mental health and wellbeing. Excitingly, this tool is for one of our most impacted population groups by mental health, and that is, of course, young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But before I start, just a little bit more about me. I'm proud to say that I've worked at BDI for over 10 years now, and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to work with a bunch of great people across that time, working on different projects and different work areas. I've included two photos there at the top on the left that are from right back in the beginning when I started at Black Dog Institute. And back then I was involved in designing and delivering rural community and youth education initiatives. Black Dog Institute was much smaller back then, and we only consisted of around 40 people. As Taz mentioned, for the last 4.5 years, I've had the privilege of managing our eHealth implementation team, which is responsible for overseeing our digital services that have been made publicly available. And while this includes working across some really fantastic evidence-based online mental health tools, such as our My Compass and Biteback programs, I think I'd say that none have inspired me as much as Ibobbly, and there are probably a few reasons for that. Firstly, I grew up in the bush on a cattle property in northwestern New South Wales, and much of my family still live regionally and remotely. And there's a photo there of me with my dad and my two oldest sons. That's a few years back now. With that, I've personally seen the negative impact that a lack of access to mental health services can have on people's lives. And sadly, for much of my life, I watched my mum struggle with poor mental health. And this was very much exacerbated by the fact that there was very little access to treatment or support, especially in the early days of her struggles. The Ibobbly concept is very much driven by the fact that there was little to no help and support available for people living and struggling with mental health in the rural and remote Kimberley region of WA. And it's with this background that a lot of my work has been very much motivated here at BDI. Secondly, I feel hugely motivated by the opportunity to play whatever small part I can in getting a program out there that's been proven to work and that has been specifically designed for Australia's most marginalised and challenged groups of people. And that's, of course, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters. With that, I'd like to invite my colleague who I'll be co-presenting with today, Tiarnee, to share a little bit about herself.
Thanks so much, Chris. So, yeah, very similar to Chris, I also grew up in rural and remote communities across Mount Isa and the Gulf of Carpentaria in Queensland. And I personally have seen firsthand the effect mental ill health can have on my mob, my family, and my community as well. And after losing too many loved ones to suicide, I started to feel helpless and feelings of despair. why is this happening to us? We are the oldest living culture. We should be the oldest living people too. And I was really driven to help provide hope and support young people by growing awareness and knowledge on how they too can look after their social and emotional well-being and what they can do when they're feeling sad and down. But coming from a rural and remote town myself, I actually wasn't quite sure how we can do this. Firstly, we had limited services, let alone services that were culturally appropriate. And when we did have those culturally appropriate services, usually our family would work in those services, or our family would know everyone that works there. So, then those feelings of shame and stigma start to creep in. On top of this, when I was in school, we didn't have school counsellors or psychologists, and still to this day, some of these communities don't have school counsellors or psychologists. You may occasionally have the fly-in, fly-out psychologists rock up from Brisbane off the plane, dressed in professional corporate clothes in 40-degree heat, but how are you meant to connect with someone who is so far misplaced from you, your community, and Aboriginal ways of knowing, doing, and being? How can you build rapport with someone that lives a completely different lifestyle than you? You also know Lifeline exists, but you're too ashamed to call the Lifeline number and talk to someone who you don't know who is. And you may not even know how to put words to what you're feeling and going through. You also know that Lifeline has a number you can text, but where you live, you have barely any reception and credit. So that really isn't an option either. These are just some of the realities and stresses that young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people face in rural and remote communities, and I have experienced personally myself. So this frustration and feelings of despair led me to my dream job of Ibobbly, the key to the piece of the puzzle that has been missing for a very long time, I think. Although we live in a first world country, some of these communities live in third world conditions. However, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have always been really early adopters of technology and use social media at higher rates than non-Indigenous Australians, with more than 60% of Indigenous people in specifically remote communities active social media users. And even in the most remote areas of Australia, mobile technologies are becoming increasingly common, which gives me a lot of hope in the benefit Ibobbly can have in reaching these communities far and wide across Australia. I'm going to pass it over to Chris now, who's going to provide a little bit of a background about Ibobbly from the beginnings.
Thanks, Tiarnee. So we've got a bit of a timeline there on the screen. As mentioned, Ibobbly is a great example of an innovative and collaborative project that started as a research project at BDI and has since moved into public dissemination. Initially, Ibobbly began as a partnership between Black Dog Institute, Alive and Kicking Goals, and Men's Outreach Service based in Broome, WA, way back in 2010. As mentioned, the project was born from community need as community members and frontline workers in the Kimberley were seeing the sadness and despair being felt by so many as a result of poor mental health and suicide. Community consultation grew the idea that an app that delivered proven psychoeducational content in a culturally appropriate way had great potential for helping address the difficult reality being experienced in the Kimberley. What followed was the app's design, led by our very own Dr. Fiona Shand, who's one of our academics at Black Dog Institute and researchers. So what followed design was development and then extensive evaluation, which involved over 500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And positively, Ibobbly's achieved some really great results, which you can see on the screen. Standout findings include significantly lower levels of depression and psychological distress, improved help-seeking behaviours, and improved sense of belonging. Participants of both trials also indicated lower scores for suicidal thinking. However, these findings were not statistically significant. So basically, there wasn't a statistically significant difference between the control group and the waitlist group in regards to suicidal ideation. Feedback across both trials from participants was very positive, indicating a high level of acceptability for the Ibobbly app. And that essentially brings us to where we are now, recognising the potential the app had for making a positive difference in the lives of young Aboriginal people. We committed to making the app publicly available with a scaled-up rollout. Since its release in September 2019, the app has received over 5,000 downloads and has the support of many communities and delivery partners across Australia. I'd now like to hand it back to Tiarnee, who has been instrumental in getting Ibobbly out there into the hands and minds of people it was made for.
Thanks so much, Chris. So besides the important fact that Ibobbly has been tested and evaluated, everything that is seen and heard in the app has been shaped by Aboriginal people. And for me, as a Kalkadoon woman, the app's content, look and feel was actually one of the first things that drew me into wanting to take on this role of Ibobbly. Having programs that have culturally relevant images, metaphors, and language I can connect with is everything and has echoed throughout our users. One of the users shared, "I find this app invaluable. I regularly boast about this app to everyone as it's culturally appropriate and engages our mob in a way that we need through stories and art." The app's beautiful imagery and metaphors have been designed by local artists in Broome, who also created new imagery to represent different ideas within the app, and the language used in the app was also chosen in consultation with the young people in Broome. Next slide, please, Chris. So although there have been many services impacted by COVID, Ibobbly has still been able to reach communities far and wide. And we have many important components of Ibobbly in being able to reach those that it's designed for, young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Firstly, we have the Ibobbly Advisory Group, who are a group of dedicated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who guide and lead us in getting Ibobbly out into communities. The Ibobbly Advisory Group play a critical role in ensuring Ibobbly is culturally informed and safe through forming and shaping projects associated with the implementation and quality assurance of the app. Secondly, we have our delivery partners, and to date, actually, we've supported over 70 different organisations and services, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services, community group services, and individuals across Australia who have been interested in Ibobbly and incorporating it into their services to get the message out that Ibobbly is available 24/7 for free. And after the initial download, you actually don't need Wi-Fi or data to use the app. Thirdly, we also have promote Ibobbly on social media, and we've had an increasingly positive, strong uptake on getting the message out of Ibobbly. And lastly, we have also been facilitating different workshops and presentations on what Ibobbly is and how services can incorporate it through providing training to staff and communities and educational sessions for young people. Next slide, please, Chris. So as you can see on the screen, Ibobbly has been downloaded in all states and territories across Australia. And this overwhelmingly positive response has actually confirmed the role in which Ibobbly can play in supporting the social and emotional wellbeing of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, especially as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people only make up 3.3% of the population. We have received over 5,000 downloads is actually incredible. I'm going to pass it over to Chris now, who's going to talk a little bit about what's next for us.
Thanks, Tiarnee. So I just wanted to finish up with a bit of a picture of what's next for Ibobbly. So ongoing implementation, obviously we'll continue to implement our Ibobbly engagement strategy, which involves all of the things that Tiarnee has just mentioned, including working with our advisory group, working with our existing delivery partners, identifying new delivery partners, and social media advertising, amongst other things. A new feature of our implementation strategy that we've been working on is an education session that's built around content from Ibobbly that can be delivered in a face-to-face or online setting. This has really been driven by significant interest we've received across the last 2 years to come into schools and community and deliver sessions about Ibobbly. In response to this request, we actually produced a face-to-face session that promotes Ibobbly through sharing some of its content and strategies. So the purpose of the session is really to both promote Ibobbly and also to deliver culturally adapted content for building good social and emotional wellbeing. And that content has obviously been tested through that evaluation of Ibobbly. We've explored this opportunity further with our advisory group and some of our delivery partners, and we've since refined and tested that session. And we're now working to establish a delivery model that can support its scaled up delivery into schools and community. And finally, continuous improvement in quality assurance. One of the most truthful sayings I've heard is that no digital product is ever finished. Technology, of course, doesn't stand still. And as users of technology, our expectations have formed and changed continuously. With that in mind, we've learned a great deal about Ibobbly across the last 2 years since it was made publicly available in terms of user expectations. For example, through engaging with mental health service providers, we've learned that there's a real desire for the app to be fully responsive to tablet devices, so health workers can actually sit down with the people they're working with and take them through the Ibobbly content together. At the moment, Ibobbly is only responsive to mobile screens, and obviously doing that, working with a mobile screen with a support worker is less than ideal. Another technological challenge we need to overcome is that the current platform in which Ibobbly is built is being made redundant by both Google and Apple app stores. So that's a real challenge for us. This doesn't mean the app will be shut down anytime soon, but it does mean that we can't currently implement any updates or enhancements to the app. This all requires funding and further scoping, and we'll be particularly focusing on this across the coming months. Being conscious of time, I'm going to hand it over to Tiarnee, who has a short video she'd now like to share with us to finish off.
Thanks so much, Chris. So we all wanted to leave you with this really short, heartfelt video of our community sharing an important message that Ibobbly plays in getting out to the community.
Ibobbly.
Helping.
Keep. Ow!
Spirit.
And
Strong.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris and Tiarnee. I absolutely love that video at the end. It always brings a little tear to my eye. That was really great. And thank you so much for the questions and comments that are coming through. They're really heartfelt and fantastic. Tiarnee, just a question for you, if I may. How do you get the Ibobbly app to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the first place? And how do you get them using it? You know, what are some of the barriers that you've got to overcome in that conversation with them?
Yeah. So I guess one of the main strategies that we have been using is connecting with different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander medical services and mental health institutes across Australia. So, for example, we work closely with an organisation in Townsville called Selectability, and usually, organisations may reach out to us. They've heard about Ibobbly on social media or through their networks, or we might reach out to them and say, hey, we have this app, we would love to share it with you and support you in getting it into your communities. And we'll provide them a little bit of a background about Ibobbly and answer any questions that they may have. We'll also run them through one of our presentations to provide more information about Ibobbly. And then through different resources such as wallet cards and flyers. So one of the key, of getting Ibobbly out there is in an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander medical service, we might have the Ibobbly flyer up and the community might see it. They can easily download it from the QR code and go through the app in their own time. I think one of the crucial components of Ibobbly is that it's a self-help app. So young people that are ashamed that they may not want to talk to their health professional yet, or a school counsellor or an adult, they may download the app in their own time, go through it in their own time. And what we're finding now is once they use the app a few times and they feel more confident in reaching out to an adult and saying, hey, I've been using this app, we should go through it together and so forth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tiarnee. That's really great. A question from Sarah here, which is a great question. Can you tell us, probably for you, Chris, can you tell us more about the Ibobbly education session?
Yeah, sure. And Tiarnee will jump in here as well, because she's actually been the person who's delivered it in a number of different locations so far. So that session, there's obviously a lot of interest, schools especially and different communities are wanting to know what Ibobbly is. And we thought that would, obviously a great way of sharing what Ibobbly is to show its amazing content. So Tiarnee and I worked on, I guess bringing to life some of that content. So taking it from the app and making it work in a real face-to-face setting. Tiarnee since delivered that session at Eora TAFE in Sydney a number of times and a couple of other locations. And, I have to say for myself, I actually think the content and the way that the psychoeducational content is delivered within Ibobbly is so engaging. I think there's probably an audience beyond even our young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for that content. So we've tested that session. We also worked really closely with our advisory group. So that it's, as Tiarnee's mentioned, they're really important to us in terms of making sure what we're doing is appropriate and safe. So we delivered that session with them, and we've received feedback from them and from some of our delivery partners, like the guys in Townsville that Tiarnee had just mentioned. And we know, I guess the next step for us is, we have a lot of thoughts and ideas, and we've been engaging with an Aboriginal education consultant who's based in the Hunter region of New South Wales on what a good delivery model would be for us in terms of how we could get this particular session out there. Obviously, to scale it up, we need more than just Tiarnee being able to deliver it. One of the things we've learned from our delivery partners is that it's very important that an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person is delivering that session. So I guess for us, it's really about, sticking closely to the Ibobbly content. We know that content has been tested and tried and tested, and we know that it's acceptable and it's appropriate. Secondly, the session's very much about working with Aboriginal people to make sure it's acceptable, and as I mentioned, our advisory group's critical for that. And where we're up to now, I guess, is really that delivery model.
Yeah. And I guess just touching on from what Chris said, and Joe also mentioned earlier about not every young person has a smartphone. So the idea of the Ibobbly educational program is also able to reach those young people who don't have phones. And what our vision is first we're starting with our Ibobbly Advisory group. So we'll train them up to deliver the Ibobbly educational program. So they're delivering it in their own communities. And we aren't, paying or training other people from different communities to fly in and deliver this session. So the people that we're training up to deliver it, the community know them. They know who they are. It's not a stranger coming into their community and delivering the session. And we think this is a really important avenue to go down because we want to train up our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from across Australia to give back to their community. And one way that we think they can do that is through this Ibobbly education program.
Yeah, thanks, Tiarnee. It sort of leads me to another question. I've got one more here I want to get to in a sec, but just a follow-up to that is how important is it to have that local representative on the ground who can help you, roll these sessions out and engage with the local communities? I loved your analogy at the very beginning about the person jumping off the plane from Brisbane in the corporate suit in 40-degree heat, and of course that's not going to work. How important is it to have that local on the ground who can help you activate these type of interventions?
Yeah, it's so crucial, and especially because every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community is unique and different, and what may not work in one community may not work in the other. So mob up in Queensland, the Murrays may do it differently to how the Koris do it in New South Wales. So having a local representative who the community know, who they can hear from, is really important for us.
Yeah, absolutely. A question here from Noura, which is a great question. What are some of the mental health management techniques and content that are associated with the Ibobbly app? Maybe Chris, one for you.
Yeah, I think I actually might end up getting Tiarnee to speak to this one because we were going to share a really great example of how we've used the content within this presentation. We just didn't have time, but I can go first if you want, Chris.
Yeah, I think one of my favourite activities in the app is the animal activity. So how it's through in the app, I might talk about it as like a face-to-face session. So how can you be like a cockatoo and yarn up? So that they'll provide different suggestions on who can you go to or where can you yarn up? How can you be like a echidna and how can you be like a green ant and keep busy? How can you be like an echidna and protect yourself from harm? So using different analogies that can connect to young Aboriginal people that they're, so for example, instead of talking about depression or anxiety, using animals as such as a way to reduce that stigma and shame and get them to talking about mental health in a way that is different and unique and they can relate to as well. So that's probably one of my favorite ones.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tiarnee. That's great. Kamea, nice little comment there from you that Google should fund the updates. I wonder if Jess from Google is listening. Hi, Jess. A good question here from Jermaine, which is really pertinent to partnerships and how you get Ibobbly, into more Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people. Could youth AMHFA instructors be trained or partnered up with this to help, roll this out across different Indigenous lands across Australia?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good idea. And what our vision is to first start small and make sure it works amongst our Ibobbly Advisory group and test it out and, get them to deliver it and incorporate feedback from the Ibobbly Advisory Group. And then we're looking at, for example, going into schools and training up the Aboriginal support staff in schools to deliver the session to their different schools. So yeah, that's definitely a great idea, and we'll definitely reach out on that one.
Great. Thank you, Tiarnee. That's fantastic. So, folks, what a fantastic presentation from Chris and Tiarnee. Thank you, guys. That was really, really insightful and really just a fantastic look inside Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health interventions in the digital mental health space, which is where Black Dog Institute really specialises with this blended care model. So thank you so much to you two for your presentation today.